It's that time again, folks. Happy December, the antithesis of the spooky season. The fall decor is down, everyone's all jolly and bright. Just kidding, this time of year can be pretty horrific for a lot of people. So yay, another haunted hippie video to distract you from life's misgivings. A fly. Oh, son of a bitch. If you see that gnat, tell me. I'll whack him. I wonder if the gnat is too small to show up on camera and I just look crazy right now. I guess I'll find out in post. So yeah, today I'll be covering everything that I watched in the month of November, and to keep things straight, I do have a structure for today's video. First, I'll tell you about every TV show that I've been watching before we get into the movies. After that, I'll touch on all the movies that I've rewatched, so I probably won't go too in-depth there, unless it's a movie that I've never really talked about on my channel before. Next, we'll go over everything that I've watched for the first time that is not a new release. So movies that came out before 2021. Today, an example would be John Carpenter's Village of the Damned. And finally, what most of you are probably anticipating, I will talk about my opinions on all of the new releases that I have watched. So this month, that'll include my thoughts on Ghostbusters Afterlife, Black Friday, and more. And sprinkled throughout the video, there will be a lot of movies that I have watched to research or prep for other videos, so I'm not really going to talk about those either. But anywho, let's just kick it off with all of the TV shows that I've been watching. First up, we have Chucky, the TV show that everyone in this community has been talking about as of recent. An idyllic American town is thrown into chaos as a series of horrifying murders begins to expose the town's hypocrisies and secrets. Meanwhile, the arrival of enemies and allies from Chucky's past threatens to expose the truth behind the killings. So I actually can't get into my thoughts here because I promised that I would do a review and a breakdown of the whole first season. I'm committing to this because it's one of my favorite franchises of all time. Chucky is one of my favorite villains of all time. So I owe it to the ladies and boys that I adore to give them a dedicated review. And also, as of right now, the season isn't even over yet, and I'm only a couple episodes in, so we're gonna move on now to Creepshow Season 3. If you're somehow unaware, Greg Nicotero of The Walking Dead is producing a Creepshow series on Shudder. So it's an anthology horror show, and it has 2 different stories in each episode. It's so campy and ridiculous, and almost all of the effects of the show are practical, so it's very much in line with the decade that it's inspired by, which is of course the 80s. My dad and I have watched the first 3 episodes of the season. I enjoyed the first story of the first episode, and then I wasn't really fond of the second one or like episode 2 really at all. But as soon as we got to episode 3, I was like, they got it. They still got it. I'll have to let you know how I feel about the rest of the season next month, I suppose. The last thing that I will say about the show though is that I think it's excellent for beginners. If you're not really somebody that can watch horror movies by yourself because you get scared, I think that Creepshow is something that you could probably handle. Another one that's definitely safe for horror beginners would be Sex Education. Of course, this is not a horror show. Otis may not have much experience in the lovemaking department, but he gets good guidance on the topic in his personal sex ed course, living with his mom, Jean, who is a sex therapist. When his classmates learn about his home life, Otis decides to use his insider knowledge to improve his status at school, so he teams up with whip-smart bad girl Maeve to set up an underground sex therapy clinic. So far, I'm only on episode 3, and I love this show. The characters feel so real, and I'm genuinely learning a lot about different sex issues that people have. Like, the show is super informative. People underestimate the importance of this kind of thing, but this show will help to destigmatize different sexual health issues. Plus, I love being educated while I'm being entertained. I'm sure you guys do too, because you watch my videos, and I always do my best to be your lovable but slightly wacky college professor. And one of my biggest celebrity crushes, Gillian Anderson, is in this show. She plays the mom, Jean, the sex therapist, and she kills it as per usual. Her character is so interesting. She like smokes weed with her son's classmates. She has this endless revolving door of lovers that come in and out of their house. It's just overall a really great time. So I know that's not horror, but I think it's worth a shot just to see if you like it. And those are the only TV shows that I watched this month. So next up, let's talk about all the movies that I rewatched this month. I rewatched the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and that was for my original verse remake video on TCM. So you can find all of my thoughts on the movie there. And then next up, I rewatched The Exorcist. This was to prepare for my top 10 horror movies of the 1970s video. And I wanted to see that if by a long shot, I might find the movie more tolerable upon a rewatch, and I actually did. But because I'll dig into my thoughts on that one in another video, I will spare my thoughts for now. Then I rewatched Twilight, and oh baby, I could talk about this movie all day. But I won't, because I know that it's not a movie that you guys came here to talk about. out. I still have a few things to say though, okay, because I just love this franchise so much. There's so much to laugh at. How could you not love it? But on a serious note, I've said this before, it's literally the only piece of mainstream media at that point in time that had taken a teenage girl's horniness seriously.
Girls get horny too.
Yeah, Twilight really took everyone by the balls and was like, yep, a teenage girl would die for some vampire dick. And it's true, honestly, even at my age, I would still like to be whisked away by a mysterious blood-sucking hottie. I truly don't know another source of mainstream media that has showed the dangers of being a teenage girl because of our own self-destructive tendencies when we fall in love. Twilight is one of the only ones to show why teenage girls so often can end up in toxic relationships, because it explores what young love feels like to a life or death degree, which a lot of us have probably experienced. Have you ever gone through a breakup as a teenager? It feels like you're dying. And I don't even think that that was necessarily on purpose, because I don't think that Stephanie Meyers is a good writer. I've been rereading the books and woof, like the amount of casual racism that we were consuming mindlessly at the ripe old age of 12 is no good. She has mass appeal and she was catering to an audience that was starved, and I think that's different than being a good writer. But we're not gonna unpack that whole series and franchise today, so moving on. I rewatched Corpse Bride, which is a movie that I couldn't even tell you how many times I've rewatched. It's because the movie speaks to my soul. Victor and Victoria's families have arranged their marriage. Though they like each other, Victor is nervous about the ceremony. And while he's in a forest practicing his lines for the wedding, a tree branch becomes a hand that drags him to the land of the dead. It belongs to Emily, who was murdered after eloping with her love and wants to marry Victor. This movie came out when I was 5 years old, and I've been obsessed with it ever since. It's beautiful, it's damn near a perfect movie, and I made it known on Letterboxd. I said, sorry that I can't be Emily. I am. It's my dream to dress up as her with a significant other someday, and I don't care if they dress up as Victoria or Victor, I just want to live out my Emily fantasy. But I don't have anything to say that I haven't already said. It's an immaculate watch for fall time. The next rewatch is one that I haven't visited since my youth, and that would be Ghostbusters. I watched this one to prep for Ghostbusters Afterlife, which I'm sure a lot of you guys did the same. I thought about doing a Ghostbusters comparison and kind of unpacking that franchise, but Movie Watch Daily is already making really great Ghostbusters videos, so I don't really feel the need to make that content because super good content on that exact topic already exists. But that movie is pretty much exactly what I remember it being as a child. I just didn't pick up on how creepy Bill Murray's character was as a kid. Everything else about the movie is super fun though. I think that most of the comedy holds up. Some of the comedy shows the movie's age, but it's not horrible. And the special effects show the movie's age a bit as well. This is kind of when we were first starting to break into computer-generated imagery, and they're pretty rough. I feel really bad saying that because I did watch a behind-the-scenes interview with some of the special effects people, and they said something like it took one person an entire week to do like 30 seconds of the effects. But there are practical effects as well, like the iconic hellhounds, gotta love them. It's a 3.5-star movie for me. It's not great, but it's a lot of fun. Then I rewatched the original and the remake of Poltergeist, and you already know why. That comparison video will be coming to you very soon. And for my last two rewatches, I also watched the original and remake of Friday the 13th. That was my most recent comparison video, and I got a lot of compliments on the intro. You guys were really into that, so thank you guys. And I'm not gonna tell you guys watching what I did in that intro because I'm trying to entice you to watch more of my content. And that does it for all of my rewatches, so now on to all of my new watches of old releases. Let me just rattle off a bunch of movies that I've been watching from the 70s because yes, I am still prepping for my top 10 movies of the 1970s video. It won't take me nearly as long to prep for my top 10 of the 80s because I've already seen a lot more movies from the 80s than I had of the 70s. We have Alice, Sweet Alice, which is kind of an early slasher. There's a lot of Catholicism-based imagery. It's very weird, not really my cup of tea. Then we have Phantasm, which I'm not sure how I feel about because it felt like one of those movies where you have to be blazed to know what's going on. So might have to give that one a rewatch someday. Next we have Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which just really leans on its psychological elements. And it's for sure a really weird and surreal experience. Again, not really one of my favorites. Then I watched Carrie to do a comparison video, so then I also watched the Carrie remakes from 2002 and 2013. But you can see all of my thoughts. I break it down for like 40 minutes straight in that video, so just go watch that to see my thoughts. I also watched The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which was of a surprisingly high quality, but the movie just felt confused as as to whether it wanted to be a narrative or a documentary. Up next, we have the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which does have some glaring issues, but overall it's a lot of fun with great music. I watched the original The Crazies, which I was kind of excited for because the remake is probably in my top 10 horror movies of all time, and I was wildly disappointed. Why am I pronouncing my W's like that today? I don't know. Then I watched Silent Night, Bloody Night, which to say the least is a real interesting piece of work. It might throw you off how low quality the movie is, but just push through that because the story itself is so compelling. I also watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a Spielberg alien film, and I know that it's not technically horror, but I do like to include sci-fi on these lists as well. It's not great, it has some nice themes, but the main character is wildly unlikable, and so it's just kind of a bore to have to follow him. And finally, we have the Amityville Horror, one of the OG haunted house movies. I don't count haunted house movies from the 60s because all of those took place in mansions for some reason. And without giving too many of my thoughts away, there was a lot about the movie that actually got under my skin, and I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. That's it for all of the 70s movies for now. There will be more next month though, so let's move on to some other new watches of older movies. Up next would be John Carpenter's Village of the Damned. 10 months after the small California town of Midwich was struck by a mysterious event during which everyone in the village fell unconscious at once, 10 local women give birth on the same day. As the unsettlingly calm and unemotional children grow at an abnormally fast rate, it becomes clear that they can read adults' minds and force people to harm themselves. This movie had way more in store for me than I expected. The opening of the movie was so shocking and nuts, my eyes were glued to my screen for the entire duration of the movie. I recognize that this movie does kind of get a lot of hate though. It's not widely beloved, but I don't know that that hate is really earned though, because I feel like a lot of it comes down just to personal preference. But the direction by Carpenter is fantastic. He gives you good characters to root for. It's genuinely pretty suspenseful, and it has a really great message about humanity, and albeit it's a basic take, but they did it from like a really fresh new angle, and I think it's worth watching just for the story alone. This one might make it on my top 10 list of the 90s, and if nothing else, it'll be an honorable mention. So I guess I'll save the rest of my thoughts for now, but I think it's such an underrated Carpenter flick. Up next would be a Polish slasher called Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight. I was just in Poland and I was watching this movie on a train as we were going through a wooded part of the country. It was just mwah. Couldn't have asked for a better setting. But the movie is only okay. A group of technology-dependent teenagers goes to an offline camp and faces a deadly danger lurking in the woods. If you're familiar at all with the subgenre of slashers, this movie will really do nothing new for you. But I still gave it 3 stars because it has great kills. The gore is hyper realistic, so if you're a gore hound, then like woof woof, you know? And it's decently enjoyable. I just recommend that if you're like starved for something new to watch, then this one is probably worth your while. I also watched the sequel of this movie, but it is a new release, so I'll wait to talk about it until later. And because that was such a long train ride that I was on, in the same day I also watched Beetlejuice. I'm surprised as well. I didn't think I would be 22 years old the first time I saw Beetlejuice. After Barbara and Adam die in a car accident, they find themselves stuck haunting their country residence, unable to leave the house. When the unbearable Dietzes and their teen daughter Lydia buy the home, the Maitlands attempt to scare them away without success. Their efforts attract Beetlejuice, a rambunctious spirit whose help quickly becomes dangerous for the Maitlands and innocent Lydia. I didn't like this movie, and I was so sad about not liking it. It should have been right up my alley. I thought the concept was great and unique. I loved Tim Burton and Winona Ryder. The cast was super loaded, but the movie is pretty garbage. I'm sure that I have some Beetlejuice stans in the crowd, and I'm sorry, but this movie is not funny. I even said in my Letterboxd review that it's pretty perverted. I just have to say, sexual harassment jokes are not funny.
Come on, no. Give me one. Come on,
We need to work something out ourselves. We just have to try.
Yeah.
What's funny about that? And someone commented on my review something like, how is it perverted? You must just be so sensitive. So I deleted the comment because it was stupid. And then not a day later, this person comes back, to check up on their work, and they go, yeah, you deleting my comment just proves my point that I was right. To live in the mind of somebody who thinks the only reason why their comment got deleted is because they were right? wild. So I look at the profile and it turns out that they're like clearly a child, so I blocked them. I refuse to live in a world where I have to be subjected to the opinions of a 12-year-old. On my Letterboxd? No. Anyway, I'm sorry, I don't like Beetlejuice. It's creepy in a weird way, not in a fun way, so next. Then I watched the Psycho remake from 1998, and it's just one of the most pointless remakes to ever exist. I didn't even finish it because it's just a beat-for-beat remake of the original, so let's just leave it at that. Up next would be a movie called The Others from 2001, and it stars Nicole Kidman. Grace, the devoutly religious mother of Anne and Nicholas, moves her family to the English coast during World War II. She awaits word on her husband while protecting her children from a rare photosensitivity disease that causes the sun to harm them. Grace initially thinks the new servants are playing tricks, but chilling events and visions make her believe something supernatural has occurred. This was a 3-star movie for me, and maybe in terms of quality, it deserves a little bit higher of a rating, but I just found the movie to be a little bit too predictable and slow. I think that the movie Haunter from 2013 might have ripped this movie off because while I was watching it, I couldn't help but thinking, have I seen this before? Also on Letterboxd, I said, ah yes, the Insidious of 2001. So it definitely just has a lot of very recognizable elements, but it was probably one of the first of its kind to have said elements. It's a nice mixture of drama and haunted house, and it also has a great performance by Nicole Kidman. I was just a little bit bored. I think the movie could have been an hour and a half long, but instead it's 2 hours long, which is just too long. Up next would be the Cabin Fever remake from 2016. Fresh out of college, 5 friends face the horrors of a flesh-eating virus while staying at a remote cabin. This is just another example of a remake having no right to exist. It came out only 14 years after the original, and it's also written and produced by Eli Roth, so just why? So I literally have no thoughts. Head empty. Let's move on. Next up would be Mandy from 2020. In the Pacific Northwest in 1983, outsiders Red Miller and Mandy Bloom lead a loving and peaceful existence. When their pine-scented haven is savagely destroyed by a cult led by the sadistic Jeremiah Sand, Red is catapulted into a phantasmagoric journey filled with bloody vengeance and laced with deadly fire. I, unfortunately, could not get through this movie. I know, I'm sorry. I tried, and I'm sure that I have disappointed some of the members of my audience, particularly maybe some of the stoners in the chat. I tried to watch this one sober, and that feels like a huge mistake, because I learned pretty quickly that for this one, I would need to be gone, blitzed, smoked to enjoy this movie. Just in a deeply dissociative state to enjoy the visuals of this movie. The storyline is really weak, and the movie is basically just a collection of these insane psychedelic visuals, which is fine. We've talked about movies of spectacle in my last video, and they have every right to exist. I enjoy a lot of those movies. But Mandy was a struggle, and I know that there's a point of the movie where Nick Cage goes on a crazy killing spree, and that's one of my favorite things that he does. But I just couldn't make it there. I know that someday I'll try again, and I will probably change my tune, but as of right now, it's a 1.5-star movie for me, so my apologies. And up next, we have... Wait, what did I watch next? I can't seem to... Oh my god, what's that smell? Oh my god, it's that movie. Yeah, this movie stinks. It's stinky. But what happens in Poltergeist 2, The Other Side? Let's find out. The Freelings have escaped their haunted house, which is now being studied by paranormal investigators, including Shaman Taylor. When Taylor realizes that the beast is masquerading as the Reverend Kane and knows where young Carol Ann now lives, he goes to warn the family that their daughter is in danger again. I was speechless when this movie ended. All I could say on Letterboxd was, first of all, a 1/2 star, and then bruh. The absolute nerve of these producers to take what was a perfect movie and then cast the same family in the sequel and then give us this? No. The Poltergeist sequel doesn't exist. There was so much bad about this movie, I don't even know where to begin. One of the most glaring issues is the magical Native American. There's just a lot of underlying racism that comes along with these tropes. Native Americans had no control and still have marginal control over how they're represented on screen. So even if the role was deeply offensive, they were still just considered lucky to be cast in a role of like a high budget production like this. It's an example of positive discrimination where it attempts to show them in a good light, but it doesn't actually do any of the work to develop them as characters. It often shows them helping out white people for like no reason, and it still otherizes them as these like exotic outsiders. When this is their land, we're the outsiders. That was one of the biggest offenses, and then my other major issue is the fact that yeah, there was a lot of creepy imagery, but none of it made context with within the narrative of the movie. And it all happened so randomly, and I could give examples, but I don't like ranting, so next issue. The girl who played Dana in the original was murdered by her boyfriend the year of the original film's release. So when it came time to write the script of the sequel, you know what these people did? They decided, yeah, her disappearance is gonna go totally unexplained in the narrative. We can just pretend she didn't exist. Gross. She died a tragically horrific death. The least that you could do is maybe honor the legacy of her character. Like, say she went off to boarding school or something. I don't know. Whew. The gnat. And my last nitpick, I just feel like I could see the dollar signs swimming in Craig T. Nelson and Jo Beth Williams' eyes. There wasn't nearly the same level of heart in the sequel that the original is beloved for. So I'm just gonna pretend that this movie doesn't exist because when I watched it, it ruined my whole week. And last, in this category of my new watches of old movies would be American Psycho from 2000. A wealthy New York investment banking executive hides his alternate psychopathic ego from his co-workers and his friends as he escalates deeper into his illogical, gratuitous fantasies. I was really enjoying about the first half of this movie until we got some very strange, gratuitous sex scenes. And beyond that point, the story felt extremely disjointed, and I realized that Bateman is meant to be like an unreliable narrator, but it just made it hard for me to follow along. And also beyond that point, I just wasn't super entertained because there wasn't much for me to latch onto. I did give the movie 3 stars though because I loved the first half. I love a good dark comedy, and Christian Bale, his performance is undeniably fantastic. And he's a method actor who actually put it to very good use with this movie. Some of what happens is improvised because he was so intimately familiar with his character and so immersed in his character. But beyond that, sometimes it's a little bit too dark, and I found the ending twist to be kind of predictable. And I felt like this all-star cast was criminally underutilized except for Christian Bale. So now, children, that finally brings me to my thoughts on all of the new releases that I watched in November. I watched Paranormal Activity Next of Kin, but you guys should hopefully already know my thoughts on that. I did a giant Paranormal Activity video already, so I'm gonna skip my thoughts on that and move on to Eternals. The Eternals, a race of immortal beings with superhuman powers who have secretly lived on Earth for thousands of years, reunite to battle the evil deviants. I gave this fine movie 4 stars because despite some moments that drag and some characters that I found rather annoying, it's a very enjoyable movie. It's really a love letter to humanity with less of an emphasis on the action and more of an emphasis on developing the character relationships. And the end credit scene had me like, wow. I don't want to spoil it. Okay, just skip ahead to this timestamp if you want to avoid the spoilers. Harry Styles shows up in the end credit scene. I about lost my mind. I am so ready. A bisexual androgynous icon joining the MCU. Sign me right the fuck up for that. Marvel was smart for that one. That's absolutely bonkers. But another credit that I have to give Marvel is this was the first time that they ever showed an on-screen kiss between 2 men. And there are people that I feel like are secretly hiding their homophobia by saying things like, oh, you don't need to pander, it's not that big a deal, it's just 2 men kissing, they're just ticking off representation boxes. Shut up! Let people have this. Gay kids have never gotten to grow up with superheroes who they can identify with. In terms of representation, even my generation only had Glee. And Glee was insane. People grossly underestimate the importance of mainstream representation. With phase 4 of the MCU, it seems like they're really going out of their way to make sure that people of all walks of life are being represented, and that's something to celebrate. A Goliath corporation like Marvel that controls so much of the media that we see, showing a gay kiss is a really big deal. And if you're like from a city or a more progressive country, this might sound kind of goofy, but there are so many rural little hick small towns, especially in America, that are so spread out from one another, and those people do not get out in the world, believe you me. Those kind of people and religious people are the ones who shout the loudest about how being gay is a sin, because the only representation of gay people that a lot of those people ever see are the mistranslations that are in the Bible. So by seeing Eternals, maybe that'll help those people to learn how to shut the fuck up. Thank you for coming to my gay TED Talk. The next new release that I watched was the sequel to Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight. When something horrible happens to the only survivor of a bloody massacre, an insecure rookie cop must overcome his fears to stop further carnage. This one goes absolutely batshit insane, and it's kind of fun. I don't think it's a good movie because the direction that they went is just super questionable, but I do admire that they were trying something super different. I can't even really talk about it without spoiling it, and it's one of those ones where I don't want to deprive you of the surprise if you decide to watch it, but just know it's not really a movie that I recommend, but it is so different and so shocking that, again, if if you're starved for something to watch, then check it out. The next movie was not a fun surprise though. No, that would be Night Teeth, starring Debbie Ryan and Megan Fox. A college student moonlighting as a chauffeur picks up two mysterious women for a night of party hopping across LA. However, when he uncovers their bloodthirsty intentions and their dangerous shadowy underworld, he must fight to stay alive. Let me just say plainly that Debbie Ryan and Megan Fox both need to get themselves a new agent because woof. 1 star. It's so weird and boring and it takes itself way too seriously for what the subject matter is. And it's a shame too because I was in the mood for a good vampire movie. I feel like vampire movies are gonna make a comeback pretty soon. And speaking of comebacks, what is going on with Megan Fox? Stop putting her in bad movies. I'm tired. I am sick and tired. Due to the utter dullness of this movie, I unfortunately don't have a lot of thoughts. I'm just gonna move on to the next one. Up next would be Red Notice, the new Netflix action comedy heist movie. In the world of international crime, an Interpol agent attempts to hunt down and capture the world's most wanted art thief. This movie kind of took me by surprise because I was expecting garbage. On Letterboxd, I did say that the movie feels like it was written by a bot, and that's still valid. Also, these days, Ryan Reynolds seems to play the exact same character in every single movie. Like, he's basically Deadpool in this movie, just a little bit less good at fighting. But it's really entertaining. I wouldn't really say that it's that funny. I laughed maybe like 2 or 3 times in the 2-hour runtime, but I was still enjoying myself because I was entertained. Beyond that, it's super basic and it's definitely crafted to cater to the most mass, broad audience possible. So don't expect a great movie, just turn your brain off and try to be entertained. Next would be The Guilty, the new Jake Gyllenhaal movie on Netflix. A troubled police detective demoted to 911 operator duty scrambles to save a distressed caller during a harrowing day of revelations and reckonings. I don't know, you guys, I don't know. It's kinda boring. They do set up a compelling story, and it's impressive to see how interesting a story can be when it's all just contained in one room, but I expect a little bit more payoff than that because I actually started to care more about the characters that Jake Gyllenhaal was talking to than Jake Gyllenhaal himself, but I had to stare at his face the whole time. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. It's certainly not a bad movie, it's just kinda meh. Moving right along to Ghostbusters Afterlife. When a single mother and her 2 children move to a new town, they soon discover they have a connection to the original Ghostbusters and the secret legacy their grandfather left behind. So yeah, everyone is loving this movie, but you could color me extremely disappointed. It feels a lot like Red Notice, where it was written to cater to the widest audience possible. So the movie ends up playing it so safe that I just can't really suspend my disbelief at all. And I'm a fan of the original. I have been since I was a kid, and I feel like what the original did much better is that it swung for the walls. It did a lot of really weird stuff. And then with Ghostbusters Afterlife, like I said, I think it's just kind of playing it too safe. It wasn't funny, and then it was also really predictable, so by the ending there's supposed to be this aww kind of moment, but I was just like, ugh. The dialogue is also just so dry, so painfully unfunny. I have to assume this movie might have been intended for children. It just really screamed lazy to me. It's entertaining enough, I guess. Like, I don't regret sitting there for the full 2-hour runtime, though it definitely could have been trimmed down, because I was checking the time throughout the runtime, which in a theater I never do. And McKenna Grace, she is so unbelievably talented, but her character was so flat and one note that I don't think that you got to witness any of her talent in this movie. Also, there's a kid in this movie called Podcast, and I feel like his name alone can tell you how annoying he was. So yeah, I gave it 2.5 stars, and in my opinion that feels really generous. And finally, for the movie that I was most anticipating this month, that would be Black Friday. It stars my boy Devon Sawa and the lovely Bruce Campbell. On Thanksgiving night, disgruntled toy store employees begrudgingly arrive for work to open the store at midnight for the busiest shopping day of the year. Meanwhile, an alien parasite crashes to Earth in a meteor. This group of misfits soon find themselves battling hordes of holiday shoppers who have been turned into monstrous creatures hell-bent on a murderous rampage on Black Friday. This was my favorite new release that I watched this month. Oh my god. So many people didn't like this movie or they were disappointed, but me and my smooth brain, oh, we kicked back and we had a good time. Also, they built up the characters a lot more than I would expect, considering this is probably what you would call a B movie. It also had some very rich, if not super obvious, commentary on, you know, working in a corporate system, capitalism, etc. Also, what What a joy that practical effects are making a comeback now. I'm honestly so enamored with the state of horror. I think there really hasn't been a better time to be a horror fan with everything that's coming out right now. We have practical effects coming out. Some of the best horror TV shows are coming out now, like better than we've seen horror TV be in years. Devon Sawa has decided that he is staying employed these past few years. And no, I didn't just love the movie because he was in it, okay? If you're new here, he's possibly my #1 celebrity crush, and my subscribers know that. I don't really know why, but I'm of the opinion that people get more attractive as they age. Like, I can't wait to see what I look like when I'm 50. That's a totally weird digression though, so back to the movie. It's not super deep, but it has a lot more heart than I was expecting. The practical effects look incredible. I love the characters that Devon Sawa and Bruce Campbell played. The other characters of the movie are also super defined and they're very strongly written. And it's not a movie that I would expect to be, quote, good. It's as fun, if not more fun than I was expecting. I might even watch it again when it gets closer to Christmas. I don't know. I don't think that I've done a top 5 list in my last couple wrap-up videos, so I want to do that today. All right, coming in at number 5, have your little opinions if you will, but that will be Twilight. I can't help how much I love the franchise, okay? I can't. So moving on to number 4, that would be Eternals. I recommend going to see it if you haven't already. Number 3, a movie that I hold so dear to my heart would be Corpse Bride. I think I've said enough on that one already, so coming in at number 2 would be Black Friday. What a joy, what a nice surprise. I just had a lot of fun. And finally, coming in at number 1 would have to be the original Poltergeist. One of my favorite horror movies of all time, and enough said because I'll be talking about that movie very, very soon. So that's really all you need to know. There are my top 5 movies that I watched in the month of November. And now to close the video, as always, I must thank my lovely, lovely patrons. I love you guys all so much, so here are your kisses. Mwah, 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 mwah. If you would like to get my kisses in every single video, you can sign up for my Patreon linked down below. All my social medias will be linked down below, and I have also updated some of the petitions and places you can donate, because as I said, this time of year can be hard for some people, so I hope that you guys are in a giving spirit. But all of that to say, together we can get through the month of December. I love ya. Have a good one. Bye!